Hey, moneymakers, welcome back to another episode of Taking Stock Live. We're bringing you all the latest business news and telling you how it will affect you and your money. While the budget debates are still going on, the opposition PNP has made their two presentations. We heard from opposition spokesman on finance, Julian Robinson, on Thursday. And today we heard from the opposition leader, Mark Golding. So what are their plans for the economy? How does it compare to what the current administration is proposing to do for the next fiscal year? We're going to dissect it tonight on Taking Stock. And then later on, the analysts will also give us an idea of how the new budget measures will impact the stock market and your pocket. But first, let me know in the comments, where are you joining us from? What part of Jamaica or what part of the world? I love to see our money makers all over the world. Also, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and share this video with a friend. Let them know that Taking Stock is live right now. And subscribe to our newsletter at getmoneynews.com. That's getmoneynews.com. Now, come on, let's get this money. On this episode of Taking Stock, the budget debates are in full swing. The opposition has made their rebuttals, but what does it mean for you and your money? Economist Dr. Chris Stokes and managing partner at Signature Creed Associates Denzil Whyte join us. And the analysts weigh in on the latest market developments. What areas of the stock market could benefit or take a hit because of the new budget measures? And Supreme Ventures year-end results are out. How did they perform? We'll discuss.
But first, here's What's Hot, brought to you by JMMB Group, your best interest at heart.
Renowned business journalist Owen James has died. James was a pioneer in business journalism in Jamaica. He created programs like The Business Day and The Business Review, which still air on local television today. Education Minister Senator Dana Morris Dixon said James was more than just a broadcaster. He was a guiding light in the world of business journalism, and his contributions will not be forgotten. We here at Money Media are saddened by his passing and salute James's tremendous contribution to the industry, paving the way for shows like Taking Stock. The Trans-Jamaican Highway offer closed on March 18. The National Road Operating and Constructing Company said that due to excess demand, the offer had to be upsized. This means NROC will raise the maximum $9 billion. Scotia Group reported an impressive 34% increase in net profits for its first quarter that ended in January. The group brought in $4.2 billion in profits. The company said all its business segments have performed well, with the loan and investment portfolios leading the way. Their total loans grew 13% to $312 billion for the quarter. The company has approved a dividend of 45 cents payable in mid-April. NCB has launched a $1 billion SME growth fund to give MSMEs access to lower-cost financing. According to NCB, the fund offers businesses a special interest rate reduction of up to 3% on loans for working capital and capital expenditure. On top of that, NCB said it's applying a 0.25% reduction across all SME loan products. The fund is available to registered SMEs that meet specific criteria. Eligible businesses must have annual revenues between 15 million and 425 million Jamaican dollars, be registered for at least 2 years, and have been in operation for at least 1 year. The fund opens March 31 and will remain open until the full allocation is dispersed. Trinidad and Tobago has a new Prime Minister. Former Energy Minister Stuart Young was sworn in on Monday as the 8th Prime Minister. Young replaced 75-year-old Dr. Keith Rowley, who stepped down from office after 9.5 years as PM and 45 years of active politics. A general election is constitutionally due in Trinidad and Tobago by November. Meanwhile, Belize's ruling People's United Party won re-election last week. According to the preliminary results, the PUP won 26 of the 31 seats in the parliament, with the remaining 5 seats going to the opposition United Democratic Party. UDP leader Moses Shine Barrow, best known for his rap career with Bad Boy Records, was one of the candidates who lost his seat. The trade war between the United States and the European Union is heating up. U.S. President Donald Trump has threatened a 200% tariff on all EU alcohol imports to the U.S. The threat is a response to the EU's plans for a 50% tax on imports of U.S.-produced whiskey as part of its retaliation to Trump's tariffs on all steel and aluminum imports to the U.S. The U.S. is Europe's largest export market for wine. The EU sends more than 4.5 billion euros worth of wine each year to the U.S. That's about $5 billion US dollars. Trump called for the immediate removal of the EU's tariff on U.S. whiskey, calling the bloc hostile and abusive.
What's Hot was brought to you by JMMB Group, your best interest at heart.
Guess what? You don't need to be rich in order to start investing. As a matter of fact, investing is how you get rich. You can start with as little as 1,000 Jamaican dollars at some firms, like this security guard that I met a few months ago. That's how much you started with?
1,000.
1,000.
Yeah. It's a good thing to do it still, to learn more.
Are you happy with it so far?
Yes.
Check out my Investing for Beginners course. Go to investingforbeginnersja.com to get started. Let's get this money.
Let's get this money.
Welcome, welcome back. Let's see who we have in the house. We got Dwight joining from Spanish Town and saying that he hopes to see the stocks rise again because of the closing of the Trans-Jamaica offer, not IPO. Mount Felix Industries is joining from Mandeville. We got JT Kingston in the house. We got Super Villain on standby. Data is joining us from St. Elizabeth. Humble Boss is in Negril in the house. Jackie is in Kingston 7. Shavane is here from Portmore. Dalton is in the Cayman Islands today. We have Unbothered representing Maypen Clarendon. We also have Colette in Kingston. X-Ray Design says Robert Young, one of the people I'm walking at Atlanta, Georgia. Big up yourself. Roy says Florida in the house. Strong Link is checking in from Manor Park. Garfield is in Spanish Town. Phil is at the National Stadium taking stock while also watching your daughter playing netball. So you're multitasking there, Phil. We got Kish saying good evening all. Jamaica is in Florida. Mikhail is in St. James. Riley's checking in from Hanover. We got Unbothered saying all hail Owen James. When I think of stocks, I think of you. RIP to Owen James indeed. Ingrid checking in from Bull Bay, St. Andrew. We got JA Patriots in Portmore. And also, who is it? Strong Link pointing out that an election date has now been set in Trinidad. Indeed, I just checked. That's breaking news, came out today. Stuart Young has announced the election date for Trinidad and Tobago. April 28th is the day. In a surprise move, nobody saw coming. You would have thought that as the new PM, he would, want to. I guess people are already very familiar with him because he's been in Parliament. But you'd think you want to get acquainted with him as Prime Minister, adjusted before he calls the election. It was constitutionally due in November. But he has called it. April 28th is election day. So we are fully in election season. We have Trinidad elections coming up. We have Jamaica being constitutionally due for an election this year. We have Belize just held their elections last week, and the People's National Party, UNational, combining PNP and PUP, People's United Party, emerging victorious for a second term there in Belize. So yeah, April 28th is the day we'll be watching out for in Trinidad and Tobago. And now to local politics and local governance as well. we're looking at the budget debate. So we examined it last week, the opening presentation from Finance Minister Favour Williams, and now we're looking at the opposition's presentations, as well as getting some reactions to the overall budget presentation. So let me introduce you to our panel today. We have joining us economist Dr. Chris Stokes, and we also have managing partner at Signature Creed and Associates, Denzil Whyte. Welcome, gentlemen.
Good evening. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for having us.
Good evening, Khalila.
So, Dr. Stokes, you've been on before. Denzil, this is your first time on Taking Stock. Can you introduce yourself to our audience?
Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm Denzil Whyte, as she said, managing partner of Signature Creed and Associates. I actually have more than 34 years of practice in as a tax practitioner in Jamaica. 16 of those years were with government, and the other 16 with the private sector, including banking and KPMG.
Okay, so lots of experience there. Great to have you on. And Dr. Stokes, let's start with you. What were your main takeaways from the government's presentation? And we'll start there and then get into the opposition a little bit later.
Right. The government's presentation was a classic Labour Party budget presentation. It featured stability, even in an election year. So the budget was nominally a little more than last year, in real terms less, 1.26 trillion. So there's no blowing up of the budget to suit any particular need. Very conservative, given the other demands, and we can get into that a little later. It had three aspects, as any Labour Party presentation does. Focuses on stability, which is their big thing, macroeconomic stability. It touched a little bit on social safety net issues. In this case, particularly, raising or proposing the plan to raise the income tax threshold, PAYE threshold, and then touched a little bit. The third thing that they always touch on is a little bit on growth. In this case, they seem to have been focusing on human capital development through the student loan program, and I'm hoping, and I actually expect to hear much more from the Prime Minister when he makes his presentation on growth initiatives. So those are the three things that really has been, for the last little while, their stock in trade, with a heavy emphasis on keeping the ship stable. So no, a couple other little things here and there, but no real surprises from the Labour Party.
Okay, Denzil, for you, I saw that you put out a position paper on it. What stood out?
Thanks, Khalila. I will start where Dr. Stokes ended, where he mentioned the growth initiatives expected to come from the Prime Minister's presentation. I believe both the government and the opposition were focused primarily on growth. Of course, we heard the interpretation of the economic performance from both sides, but growth and economic growth drivers and performance seem to be something that was present in both their presentations. When I considered the initiatives proposed by the new finance minister, congratulations to see a lady in that position for the first time. But the things that stood out for me were the incentives to investors, and particularly non-resident investors, with that big move from a high of 33.33% withholding tax on dividend down to 15%. I had just a week before, called on the government to lower the withholding tax to 12.5%, but they carried it from over 33% down to 15%. That's a big move for investors and attracting capital and increasing the yield of particularly non-resident investors. The other thing that was big from my perspective from the presentation, particularly of the finance minister, was the move to reintroduce accelerated depreciation. Now that too is another big indicator that the government is moving to incentivize growth, because on the one hand they're making investing in Jamaican companies more attractive by lowering the withholding tax rate, but when those companies get the funding, they're making it easier for them to retool, get into investing in better technology, and actually having the reward of the deduction of those investments over a short period, expected to be about 2 years, coming down from the average period of 8 years to recover those funds. On the side of the opposition, the main tax initiative that they proposed relates to the 3-year exemption from corporate, or let me say income tax, since I did say MSME, right, for the first 3 years. That's good, but the weakness on that particular note is that it lacks the accountability that one would get from a stock market, a stock exchange setup. I definitely prefer the micro market argument, because anybody who accesses funds from that route would be under some amount of scrutiny and supervision, and have to actually make their results public over a period of time. So I find both parties reaching for growth initiatives, but the government's proposals seem to be more solid.
Dr. Stokes, you described the JLP's presentation, or Finance Minister Favour Williams's presentation, because the PM hasn't gone yet. You described it as a typical Labour Party budget. Was the PNP's presentation a typical PNP type budget? There were a lot of social initiatives mentioned.
Yes. And before I get into that, we just to throw in the pot the proposal to eliminate the asset tax for banks in exchange for some fees. It may be worth discussing that in a little bit. Now, when you're in opposition, you can ignore the first rule of economics, which is scarcity and choice, right? So you can speak as if you can do everything. We're going to do this, we're going to drop that, and we're going to build this, and so on and so forth. But you don't have the constraint of making it fit within 1.26 trillion, for example. So I think what we saw was not the sort of rigor of fitting into a budget, but an idea and a direction that speaks more to support for persons at the individual level, support for students. It's an old-time PNP thing where you're helping poor people, which is important, and also speaking in general terms about growth and growth initiatives, claiming paternity for stability, and saying that all these things that the JLP is speaking highly about amount to nothing, amount to naught if we're not growing. So in my interpretation, it is easier for the opposition that doesn't have its hands on the wheel to speak more loosely, and I believe we saw some of that. And there are lots of areas to criticize, and I think they're zoned in on a whole bunch of them. Not hearing you.
Sorry. Denzil, anything that stood out in particular from the PNP's presentation, especially today by Mark Golding?
Well, the opposition is in a position to do more, I think, to offer more, promise more. And I didn't see that delivered today. It can be argued actually that the promise to take the income tax threshold to 1.5 million in 2016 was what actually caused the then opposition to come into to government. I was actually expecting more from the presentation of the PM in relation to revolutionizing the economy, or putting something in place in relation to talking more about security. What we heard about was energy cost efficiencies, but they're all general, right? It doesn't necessarily come all the way home to the man on the street. They still have time to reach out to their audience, but I expected more.
Right. So there were quite a few things, the hot button issues that we always expect to hear: student loans, what are they going to do with NHT? Taxes are something that we always hear about as well. And then minimum wage was another one. Dr. Stokes, what do you make of the proposal to shift from a minimum wage to what Mark Golding described as a livable wage that would be tied to the cost of living? Is that feasible?
So one of the problems with studying economics, as I have, is that it removes the opportunity to dream and have rose-colored glasses. I think it's fairly predictable that if you move from a minimum wage to a livable wage, that could be a material increase, I think we may expect less employment, because people simply can't afford to pay those wages. We may expect less profitability, especially for smaller companies, smaller medium-sized companies that we are trying to develop at this stage as major employers in the country. On the plus side, more money in persons' pockets, more spending could be a fillip for the economy. But my suspicion now is that if you say to, for example, the security companies that instead of paying minimum wage, you have to add another 20, 30% on that, or any number of persons that hire large numbers of persons, it's going to compromise their profitability. And some may say, well, fine. But a logical outcome is a reduction in the number of people employed and reduction in employment opportunities. Now, we are nominally at full employment. That's another discussion that we can have. Just if you listen to Statin, but I would be extremely reluctant to pursue that. I think those who are able should, and I think the key is to have a competitive labor market so that people who can pay more will pay more, and folks will earn more and do it that way as opposed to by government fiat.
But the minimum wage was increased, I think, last year. It's been increased, and we haven't seen that drastic decline in employment. As a matter of fact, unemployment has gone down.
Right, and so raised a very important point. Now, if you move it from 1 to 110, you may not see anything. You may not see anything at 150. If you move it to 3, that may be the inflection point. And I'm just saying that we have to be careful when we do these things, because you do hit a point that is, what we refer to as an inflection point where it will make a difference. And you remember from the time of discussing the minimum wage that the argument was that many employers and individuals are actually already paying more than the minimum wage. All right, so it doesn't bite yet, it doesn't kick in yet until somebody now who used to pay twice the minimum wage, and they're comfortable with that, but now you're saying you have to pay 3 times more, as an example. So there are those inflection points that you have to concern yourself about. But you should recall that at the time when the increase was raised, that many people said, "Look, I'm already paying my help or my security guard or whatever more than that already." So it did not have that inflection effect.
Kalila?
Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to also comment on one of the winning strategies from the opposition side, which was actually a focus on emerging markets. They spoke of trying to take advantage of the culture factor, the entertainment factor. And I do believe that is something for any government to think about. They need to, in my humble opinion, pick the winners, pick the areas that they believe we as a country have a particular edge in terms of a competitive advantage. And if they focus on feeding and growing the winning industries, I really believe it can have a seriously positive impact on growth. And I'm still on growth because I think the budget this year is all about growth from both sides. But if they want growth, they need to pick winners, support them, create the environment for them to win.
They promised $1 billion for the creative industries, creative businesses. But Denzil, as the tax expert on the panel, you mentioned earlier the raising of the income tax threshold to $1.5 million being possibly what led the JLP to win back in 2016. They are now proposing to raise it to $2 million over the next 2-3 years. Is that proposal feasible? And no, I've been somebody who's thought from the beginning that they should abolish income tax entirely. Like I expected, especially since it's an election year, that maybe they would have gone there this year.
Well, you're very optimistic, Kalila. Right. But the move now to increase the rate by 100,000 a year is not material, is not anything to write home about. But what I don't like about the move is that the government continues to set the date for the increase in the rate almost in the middle of the calendar year. The calendar year is what the assessment of income tax is for individuals, and it's individuals that benefit from this personal income tax threshold. And it's always a nightmare for the persons who need to calculate their taxes, for the persons who need to change the software to facilitate the calculation of taxes when the nil rate is changed other than on January 1st. Now, with the government having the foresight to point to the years that they are going to increase it, I'd really appeal to them to consider changing at least the 2026 and the 2027 increase dates to coincide with the beginning of the calendar year, which is what individuals are assessed on. I thought that was a weakness in the proposal.
Makes sense. Although politically speaking, they like to make announcements that take effect almost immediately, so you can score those brownie points now, especially in an election year.
But they called it. They have forecasted it, so they have already won in that regard. But don't make it as hard. Don't make it an administrative burden, not only for the administrators, but also for the practitioners and the taxpayers. They have already called it. They have received that those kudos. Restrict it, man. Make it more meaningful and less interruptive by changing the effective date to January 1st. There's also the change in the threshold for registration for businesses from 10 million to 15 million. Now, I would love to see them peg it to a particular US dollar amount. It could be 10,000 US. They are doing this sort of thing in taxation already. It's in place in relation to income tax and what you can recover in relation to private motor vehicles at 35,000 US. So the taxpayers and the can do the calculation. Restrict this registration threshold to a US dollar amount so that it's not up to any government and up to any budget time for it to constantly be changing and persons waiting to see what will happen. I'd love to see that change as well, Kalila.
Well, if they do that, they might as well do it for minimum wage too. Just peg it.
The thing with the minimum wage, like Dr. Stokes, I'd want to agree with him that you need to be more careful with that, because it's not just a matter of a livable wage or a particular percentage. That US dollar amount would need to be taken into consideration with other factors in the economy, the employment rate, the unemployment rate, and other factors as well. So I wouldn't do the linking for the minimum wage.
Dr. Stokes, a hot issue every single year, every single budget is always NHT. The PNP has said that the JLP continues to withdraw funds from the NHT to support the budget, which they had promised to discontinue as of 2017. They haven't. And then we also have the proposals by the PNP for how they are going to impact workers, lower wages, lower NHT interest rates for public sector workers, suspending payments if you're unemployed. Sorry, that's student loan. 3-month moratorium. Also, the $1 billion Young Owners Deposit Fund, and then this rent-to-own program. What do you think of all of this that was said about NHT?
Okay, so I have mixed feelings. Rent-to-own for sure. I think a focus on getting, and I spent many years in the Building Society movement. I think the focus on getting people into their homes through the NHT is a good thing, a very good thing. All right, it forms a basis for generational wealth. So full marks with the intention there. I think the matter of we call it National Housing Trust. Are these funds actually in trust, or are they just part of the government revenue? That has been litigated. It is part of the government revenue. The government can, without fear of contradiction, access and spend those funds. The question then becomes more of a moral one, or doing what you said you would do. And as things stand currently, there's no shortage of funds in the NHT to complete projects. There are all kinds of other things: affordability, getting things done in time, getting things done in the right areas, and access to land and so on and so forth. So yes to that initiative. We can complain about the government accessing it, but that has been litigated already. I do get a little concerned. When we had a period in time or a point when we removed a number of anomalies from our budget process, including favorable interest rates to certain groups. All right. And I think that, if you talk to the IMF and the World Bank, they don't like to see those things in the economy because they feel it distorts the economy, right? The PNP is proposing to reintroduce preferential rates for public sector employees, which really I think is appealing. Whether or not it will mean that more people will get houses, frankly, is left to be seen. But I think it has a lot of appeal, and it goes in the right direction in terms of a focus on getting people into their homes and forming the basis for generational wealth creation.
And Denzil, what are your thoughts on NHT proposals, re-NHT?
So the opposition proposed to remove the value of land from the sales price, but only in relation to NHT developments. I have a problem with that. I'm not so sure. I know NHT has a lot of money, but I'm not so sure that they are delivering sufficient housing solutions for them to be the vehicle to pass on such a benefit to the final consumer. I would prefer if a system was introduced that would allow some form of rebate or subsidy, or even some tax incentive back to the persons who actually buy a home in the year that they acquire it, but not only from the NHT. I don't see that selective basis of passing on a benefit as being a good thing. I like the rent to home own idea, and I would love to have heard them propose the reverse mortgage, where the seniors can exit with pride instead of coming up short at the end of their years.
Okay. Well, finally, let me ask both of you, what are you hoping to hear from the Prime Minister when he makes his presentation on Thursday, starting with Dr. Stokes?
Yes, I didn't hear you quite clearly, but I suspect you're speaking about the Prime Minister's presentation, if I picked up sufficient there.
Yes. What would you like to hear from the
Growth,
PM on Thursday?
yes. It has to be two things. Growth, a growth initiative. There have been a number of false starts over the two administrations of the JP with growth. Now that we can have some confidence that there's macroeconomic stability. And if you if you think about basketball, when you pivot, one foot must be firmly rooted. We can pivot, but we have to stay firmly rooted in macroeconomic stability. I hope to see far more policy initiatives towards growth. The bigger thing, though, is the quality of implementation, and that this has, on a matter of growth over the two terms, this has actually let the JLP down.
But what are those policy initiatives that could lead to growth?
So there are. Let me just say too. I don't think the government. There is a role for industrial policy where the government can say, okay, we're going to invest in this area or that area. That is fine. I think the biggest role for government, however, is to make it easy for an individual to start a business, get capital, register the business, run a business, fail, and start again. This is what you need in the economy to get young people to come and take a risk. All right, and I think we really need to unleash that power. So I'm not going to say you need to, convert bauxite into aluminum or so on and so forth. The government needs to set the playing field so that it's easy to start a business. People are a trained workforce. Equity capital, not debt. Micro market is important. We didn't speak about that enough. Equity capital, and an opportunity to try decent bankruptcy laws so that failure is not something that you have to live with for the rest of your life, but you can start over. And that infrastructure, I think, is what we need to allow the natural entrepreneurial spirit of the Jamaican to come forth. And I think, the same Jamaican that is doing so well everywhere else will begin to do very well here.
Denzil, what would you like to hear on Thursday?
Okay, so I would love to see a merger of the government's micro market and the opposition's 3-year exemption for MSMEs. One, because the tax exemption would actually make it more attractive for those persons to go to the public rather than go for private credit. And two, the additional scrutiny for having to produce financial statements and make it available to investors, that will keep the micro market owners more accountable. And I'd really love to see that.
Well, the junior market gets a 5-year exemption and then 50% for the next 5 years. So I feel like the micro market should get at least that too.
I agree that there should be some thought in relation to that. And let's keep our fingers crossed to see what the PM will come up with. There's something else I'd love to hear from the PM. A pet peeve that I've been talking about for years. And it's the differential rates in terms of income tax rates for where we have some of our biggest companies and biggest employers, the persons who pay their employees the highest wages are in the financial sector. And the financial sector is under a serious burden. Whereas ordinary companies pay income tax at 17.5%, the financial sector is paying income tax above 33%. Now it's almost double, and then they're under serious regulation. I'd love to hear from the government a plan to lower the tax rate on those financial services firm, and consider that in our near markets, the companies that our financial services firms are competing with in US, in the Caribbean, they're not paying those rates. And if we really want to be world class, we need to stop pressuring those who are facilitating scale. I believe that one of the easiest way to actually increase efficiency is to encourage scale. We shouldn't have a situation where scale, because they make a lot of money collectively, because there's a lot of investment and a lot of investors that have to put together to make this money, they're being penalized by almost double the rate of income tax. I'd love to hear a plan to lower the income tax rate on the biggest companies in the country over a period of time, with the understanding that it will cause more business to be in Jamaica. It will cause some of those very companies right now to expand in Jamaica rather than looking to expand in Cayman and Barbados and some of the other countries that have better rates of income tax.
Interesting. Well, we look forward to that presentation on Thursday, and of course we will be here reporting on whatever is announced Thursday, and then when the finance minister wraps up next week on Tuesday. Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you, Denzil.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kalila.
Before we take our break, let's head into our poll question for this evening. What was your biggest highlight from the opposition's budget presentations? A, $1 billion fund for creative entrepreneurs. By the way, I saw that comment. Oren said, Cal, the $1 billion commitment to TikTokers, we're demanding to hear how it will be funded. Where will the money come from? It is not specifically to TikTokers. It is not only specifically to content creators either. It is to creative businesses. So creative businesses span a broad range, not just content creators and not just TikTokers. So back to our question, our poll question. What was your biggest highlight from the opposition's budget presentations? $1 billion fund for creative entrepreneurs, NHT rent to own and deposit fund, a livable wage tied to the cost of living, or other. Leave a comment. There are quite a few things that you can choose from. What was your biggest highlight from the opposition's budget presentations? Leave your answers in the chat, or you can take our poll over on Twitter or in the community tab here on YouTube. Up next, we've got your market recap, and the analysts are standing by. Time now for your market recap. The JSE Combined Index gained 2,700 points, or about 1% last week. 124 stocks traded across the main and junior markets for the week ending Friday, March 14, 2025. 44 made gains, 68 lost value, and 12 stayed the same. 152 million shares changed hands on the Jamaican dollar market, valued at $967 million. JMMB 10% VR JMD preference shares was the week's most traded stock, with 22 million shares changing hands. It started the week at $2. Wigton traded the second most shares. The stock opened Monday at $1.19. And Kintyre Holdings rounded out last week's most traded. Kintyre was also the week's biggest loser, down 22% to start the week at 31 cents. Now let's see who had the biggest gains. Knutsford Express was the JSE's top stock, up 28%. PBS USD had the second biggest gain, up 24%. And 138 Student Living rounded out the top stocks, up 11%. On the losing side now, Pulse Investments was the week's second biggest loser after Kintyre Holdings, down 18.5%. And Spurtree Spices lost almost 16% to close out the week at $1.33. Over on the Trinidad and Tobago Stock Exchange, the composite index was mostly flat last week. Massey was the TTSE's most traded stock. It opened Monday at $3.89 TT. Scotiabank Trinidad and Tobago was the market's top gainer, up 3% to start the week at $55.95 TT. And on the losing side, Endeavour Holdings fell 15% to open Monday at $16.15 TT. Over in the U.S., the Dow Jones lost 0.5% last week, while the S&P 500 gained 1% and the Nasdaq was up about 2%. At the pumps, gas prices fell 79 cents last week, while diesel prices fell by $3.06. In foreign exchange, it took an average $157.31 Jamaican to purchase $1 last Friday. That's 54 cents less than the week before. One Canadian dollar cost an average $110.09 Jamaican. One British pound cost $206.49 Jamaican. And you could buy €1 for $174.25 Jamaican on average. Finally, on the crypto markets, Bitcoin prices were flat over the past 5 days, trading at $83,600 on Monday. It was the same for Ethereum, which ended Monday at $1,907. Like the show? No, I mean, do you really like this show? Well, support us by making a donation on Patreon. Your support will go a long way in allowing us to continue creating content like this and keep taking stock free for everyone. Go to patreon.com/moneymediaja. The link is in the description. This segment of Taking Stock, The Analysts, is brought to you by Sagicor Investments.
Disclaimer. This is not intended as financial advice. Please consult a licensed financial advisor before making investment decisions.
Welcome back. Let me take a few comments before I introduce our analyst panel for this evening. X-Ray Design says non-resident investors often establish investments/joint accounts with family members living at home so as to reduce the transactional burdens one usually faces while overseas. That's a good point. Many of them do. But for those who don't, well, the reduction in the dividends for non-residents is welcome, I'm sure. The diplomat of the era says if these companies were granted lower income tax rates, they should pay employees more. Stronglink says move to replace higher rates with higher profits and get more taxes there to compensate. Diplomat again, research and further reduction in crime. So that was the highlight for this person. Margaret Brown says the NHT should offer even more benefits to those who have their own land. They have quite a few benefits for people with their own land. I remember we had them on our show with Remax several months ago, actually, and there was something specific in there. I can't remember the details right now, but you can look into it. Stronglink says the Jamaican market is in a coma for years. The bear just won't hibernate past 2-3 years, maybe. All right, it is time to introduce our analysts for this evening. And for those of you who are the real OGs who've been watching this show from 2019, 2020, you will remember our next guest, Jodianne Aris. She is now Assistant VP of Research and Strategy at Sagicor Group. Welcome back, Jodianne. It's great to have you after a few years.
Hi, thanks for having me. Hi, everyone.
You come back with new title, big title.
A little bit.
And we also have with us our Taking Stock analyst, David Rose. Welcome back, David.
Night, Kalila.
Okay, so let's start with Jodianne, because we've been talking about the budget for the past couple of weeks. We've been analyzing the announcements made by the government side, the promises made by the PNP side. But what areas of the stock market could take a hit or could benefit as a result of the things that have been announced?
Well, quite a bit has been mentioned, particularly in the presentation by the finance minister, that could have some impact on the market. And I know generally when we think of budget presentations, you start out to think what is in it for me as an individual. But I think, what we want to look at is how it is that it could benefit areas on the stock market that could then eventually be of benefit to you. I think when we think of probably, the one that's talked about most, which should have been the increase in the income tax threshold, and you think about, what will come to you as an individual on a monthly basis, it seems a little, I think, as your earlier panelists mentioned, it is a bit non-material. But when you think of the cumulative spend, so if it is just $2,000 per person, but when you think about where that could go with everyone who is getting an additional 2,000 per month, then you consider that there could be added benefits within the stock market. And if it is, as mentioned, $2,000 per month, then what you're looking at is that you probably find that that cash just gets petered out into probably consumer discretionary or some consumer staples. So things that you regularly buy at supermarket are probably something you wouldn't normally buy, but it's not too expensive. And so that means that there's a potential that that fund or those cash is really going into the areas of the economy that could benefit in terms of from stock market. So whether it is like, persons may go to a Fontana or a regular supermarket, then those could be areas that could benefit on a cumulative basis. And when you think about, $2,000 per person being spent additionally per month. I think another one mentioned would have been the micro market on
Yes.
the stock exchange, which is quite
Very
exciting.
curious to hear your thoughts on that. Is that feasible, you think?
Well, at this point, what they're doing is looking to establish a technical working committee. So there has been, as the minister presented, that the JSE has already been looking, and they're seeing that there are some companies that could be suitable to fit into this category. And so there'll be a little bit more work in development to see how exactly that could work. I think what it will bring, though, is for some investors to be able to participate in a different way. So I think along with micro markets on the JSC, what will come is also education in terms of how it is that micro companies or smaller companies in terms of their development. And so the expectation of how it is when you give capital to companies at that size and at that stage of development, what it really means. And so you could find that investors benefit for in terms of looking with a much longer term horizon that could be beneficial. So it'll be giving investors an opportunity to benefit from companies that are coming from a very young stage in their development and able to work and grow with them over time. I think generally the market or the investment market will be open because I think we're generally supportive of growth within our economy. And so it will mean a bit of a change because there may not be companies that they're typically looking at in this regard. And so it may just mean that there will be a little bit more working to do in terms of the investment banking end. But it does present as something that's quite interesting and very good for the overall market as well as for us in terms of investors.
What special considerations do you think companies of that size may need if they're supposed to list on a micro stock exchange?
I think, well, one of the things that your earlier panelists would have mentioned is that quite a bit of companies that are micro and small are not as active in terms of financial preparation. So they tend to have an idea of what they're working or what it is that they're making, but in terms of having proper record management. So I think support, and the government generally for the years have been giving support to micro and small companies. And I think extending some of those in terms of the development or how it is that they can grow or develop their businesses in terms of better financial presentation would be one. And as usual, seeing that the junior market has a tax exempt, there would be that area that investors would be looking for, as well as those micro companies would be probably seeking in that regard as well.
Mm-hmm. David, let me bring you in here. Welcome back, David.
Thanks, Kalila.
So I know that you've been looking at a particular stock this week, and that is Supreme Ventures, because their financial results are out, their year-end results are out. How did Supreme Ventures do?
It was a tough year for Supreme Ventures. While their top-line gaming income went up by 5% to $52.67 billion, their consolidated net profit went up from $2.44 billion to $1.78 billion. And, all those major hits was from Hurricane Beryl. That was one major impact. They had higher operational costs at Supreme Ventures Racing Entertainment Limited. That's the promoter / operator of Caymanas Park. So it was a pretty tough year for SVL, and it kind of showed up in the dividend payments as well, because Supreme Ventures, alongside Carreras, the sin stocks, they have what you'd call very gracious dividend policies. So Supreme Ventures, they tend to pay out 90% of their recorded profit for each period, vis-a-vis a Carreras which pays 100% of their profits to shareholders. So in the case of SVL, for their dividend with respect to the fourth quarter, they just declared a dividend of 0.0455 as a dividend vis-a-vis 0.1088 in the prior period last year, which is a 58% reduction, which should kind of tell you the impact SPL felt within the fourth quarter. Now, at the recent Mayberry briefing, Gary said that they're doing a lot of cost savings and looking at efficiency measures to bring the businesses, or actually the different subsidiaries, into the black. So, we saw earlier today's story about, some executives at SPL, apparently being made redundant. We sadly saw the departure of Jesus Johnston. He was the CEO of Supreme Ventures Gaming Limited, and we also have seen SPL just try and see what others they can put into place from their subsidiary's growth perspective. So Supreme Ventures Fintech Limited, they recently were able to onboard some utility providers for bill payments, and looking to also grow the remittance side as well. And they're still looking to the overseas expansion route. So pretty tough here for SVL. Significant contrast to Carreras, which had its best year ever, which is pretty surprising because I'm not sure if it was just a case of higher prices or just the introduction of views in the market that got more people smoking or vaping, but two different tales of two different sin stocks. Short to Campari, rum sales were pretty good despite the disruption last year, and they said that they worked out the kinks in terms of the shortfall or the shortage that occurred last year in terms of rum production.
I'm kind of surprised at that performance by Supreme Ventures because along with the other sin stocks, as you call them, I feel like those are companies that will always make money, and especially when times are hard. Because if people are struggling, they're going to want to take a chance to try win that cash pot to make up for the shortfall.
But the irony about it, Kalila, customers winning is a bad thing for SVL. So more gaming is good, but when more persons are winning the lotto, it's a bad thing because that's an expense they have to recognize when it does take place. And just to go into further context, yes, persons will likely be taking more chances to bet to try and earn more income, but at the same time, the product disaggregation also matters. So what do you mean by that? So Supreme Ventures, their largest business is Cashpot. It is literally as their biggest product. Just calling a number of a random spinning or a ball being spun in a machine, that's their biggest business, mainly between Kingston, St. Andrew, and St. James. Other areas like Just Bet, there are other draw games in the daytime, those, are still growing, but Cashpot is just that strong business venture. And they said that they're currently in Ghana and still testing out the market and learning the different elements on the ground. So it's an interesting time, especially since they're trying to expand whilst at the same time, managing their financial affairs, because I find it pretty weird that, SVA would have taken a $498 million short-term loan or margin loan from Mayberry Investments. It leveraged equity portfolio, which isn't a bad thing, but it just seemed very weird because SVL as a business typically, is known to have very robust positive operating cash flow. And, SVL currently has a $3 billion bond coming due in October, has a $500 million bond coming due in January 2026. So right now, it's just an interesting time to see how they're going to circumvent and navigate this period.
I heard you make the contrast between SVL and Carrera. Stronglink says Carrera's up by close to 100% in the last few months.
So if you go back to July/August 2026, Carreras was around $8 at the time. It's trading at $16. Well, it traded at $16 up to the prior week. So 100% increase in the stock price, and the earnings that we saw when the audited numbers came out kind of justified that stock price increase. And alongside the higher dividend payouts, a lot of shareholders are pretty happy right now because Keras is just that consistent stock alongside Scotia and SVL that despite any season, any weather, that dividend check is going to come into your bank account.
Jodianne, I'm going to bring it back to you and back to the budget debate. So we know we have the Prime Minister left to go. We have the Finance Minister preparing to do her closing as well. What measures would you like to see in their presentation specifically for business?
Well, I think the industry I work in, and where we look in terms of what it was already mentioned. I think one of the disproportionate in terms of tax measures is really the asset tax. I think both parties would have touched on it thus far, with the current administration pointing out that they are likely to express some of the ideas that have been presented by the industry in terms of how it is that they can look to see, whether it is a phasing out or a reduction. And we'd have seen where the opposition spokesman on finance would have pointed out that the opposing party has a plan in terms of phasing it out over a period of time. I think, when you think of a tax that is for insurance companies, security dealers, as well as deposit-taking institutions, it is an additional hit for those companies. And I think, it's one of those areas that as investors, and I think earlier, one of your panelists would have mentioned in terms of lower tax for some of those larger companies. So if those are implemented, those are areas where investors should really look to say how it is that once those things are highlighted in terms of positioning your portfolio to make some amount of gains in that regard. I think just mentioning in terms of what David mentioned about dividend companies, one of the things to note as well is that with a bit of a change in terms of capital gains or in terms of interest rates coming down, you saw a bit of a shift towards a lot of the dividend paying stocks on the market. So persons were a bit out of the stock market for a period of time because they were able to put the money in safe cash, such as BOJ, CDs, or repo rates. With those rates coming down, you found that persons made a move to try and still gain some amount of good income, and so they would have shifted a bit to those dividend paying stocks. And I think careers would have been one of those that persons really flocked to or liked, and that would have helped in terms of the boost for that price movement. But also the minister mentioned in her presentation, and we'd have touched on it earlier in the panel discussion, that there would be a bit of standardization for dividend, for the withholding tax on dividend income. And I think what that presents is an opportunity for persons who are overseas or companies overseas who may have been thinking to look at dividend stocks, but may have thought that the tax component of it was a bit too high, that it could also aid a bit in terms of the trading for some of those companies that are strong in terms of dividend payments.
All right, David, I'll give you the last word. I don't know if you've been following the budget debates, but anything in particular you would like to hear from our leaders?
I have to be following the budget debate, Kalila. It affects all of us. So just to respond to some things that Jody and would have mentioned earlier. So the asset tax, it's just an unfortunate symptom of what I'd call low compliance. What I mean by that? So the government is owed over $100 billion in taxes, and if the government is able to collect 5-10% of that amount, consistently, it wouldn't be a situation where the government has to be retaining this asset tax on the fincos, because one thing about it is these dividend or its assets withholding, its asset tax is not tax deductible, so it doesn't know your taxable income. It's an expense, but it doesn't know your taxable liability. So that's one part of it. The second thing is, when it comes down to that whole withholding tax reduction rate, Kalila, I think that a lot of persons might have overestimated what the finance minister was trying to posit, because here's the thing about it. The reduction in withholding tax rate, based on the revenue measures that were published by the Ministry of Finance, that is only going to see a reduction of about $9 million in revenue for the government. And the reason why is the reduction in the tax rate is only for non-resident individuals and companies that don't have tax treaties with Jamaica. So the persons who are still using the St. Lucian IBCs, persons who were already, let us say, using or tax treaty with Canada or USA, it's already 15% in some cases. So if you're a person or citizen from a country that's a tax resident, with Jamaica, tax treaty with Jamaica, it works out in your favor to pay less in withholding taxes. But you have companies, like a Kingston Wars, which as a result of being a SEZ, starting last year in 2024, there's no withholding tax applied on dividends. So it's a Jamaican company, but based on other legislative measures or benefits it has accrued under the SEZ Act, there's no withholding tax applied on the dividends paid to its shareholders. So the reality is the tax collection and compliance and effectiveness in that tax collection is really where the government needs to be going forward. It's good to hear that the Minister of Finance, Havel Williams, spoke to having tax office open on weekends to reduce some of the traffic that is in the tax offices during the weekdays. But that tax collection, and that effective tax collection is really where we need to move forward, because the reality is, if we were having a situation where taxes were collected more effectively, efficient at the IRS, you probably wouldn't see the government saying it's TGH shares, for example. We're using other creative measures of monetization to fund some of these givebacks that we are so accustomed to as we keep hearing no new taxes every year. But just one last item in terms of what I want to see from the budget is really when it comes on to what I'd call somewhat more targeted measures and education to the general public, especially for small businesses. So what do I mean by that? So someone, at customs, has pointed out to me, and this is why I say that education is a critical component to our program and other mediums, that we have something called a productive input relief. It's basically a measure that allows for you to bring in key inputs, let us say capital, machinery, and so forth, at a lower duty than you would pay just by bringing it in normally. Like some of these key or these pieces of information, if they're more promulgated to the public, could seriously benefit small businesses, alongside, just having more relatively tax-friendly measures to facilitate smaller businesses to be encouraged to become formalized. So adjusting the GCT registration threshold to $50 million is one thing, but something that the SME business president pointed to, which I think is a step forward that we need to consider or make available, is switching from the tax payable based on an accrual basis to a cash basis, which would really work out better for all of the businesses that currently, report or pay taxes on an accrual basis, since you might sell goods on credit, but you might not collect it in time when you need to pay taxes. And with respect to the micro market, I really hope that technical committee engages the public, because I think the JSC is really a disservice to investors in not strengthening what I'd call the rules and enforcement of the junior market companies. I don't think it's right that you're gone 15, 16 years with junior market now, and the companies on that market don't face any monetary fines for any breaches of the rules. And reality speaking is, I'm glad to see these small businesses get a chance to have a space to have an incubator to try and grow, but the audit fees, the compliance fees, Jody mentioned it, that infrastructure is put in place to properly monitor your income, expenses, and everything else in between. It's not a thing that you can just snap and get right overnight.
Yeah.
And
I was at a panel today, and one of the panelists was mentioning that the minimum to do an audit is $500,000.
No, that's correct. And the thing is, it also depends on the complexity of the business, what kind of support you on your side have, because what most people don't appreciate is that the company is the one prepares the financial statements. The auditor is the one that comes in and says, hey, we've done a verification to say that what the company has prepared makes sense and is fair and true. So if the company themselves are not in that state, to be ready for audits, or are struggling to get evidence and be ready for that structure, it's going to incur additional costs for those businesses. And on top of that, we're currently seeing a situation whereby auditors, where there's a relative auditor shortage in the space, which means that for these smaller companies, you might have to give them a longer timeline to submit the audited financials, because an auditor is going to prioritize their high dollar clients vis-a-vis the smaller businesses. And even when it comes on to, the audits, there are just some auditors that in the Jamaican space I'm very apprehensive of. The auditors to come in the JSC, and the gaps that I see that they don't catch are quite concerning. So these are just some things I'm pushing forward in terms of things that I see going forward in the budget, whether this government or another government takes place. We need to give small business space and education and knowledge to truly thrive. A lot of persons don't know about the productive input tax relief or productive input relief, and just other little measures that can benefit them tremendously.
Yeah, definitely. We need to see what is going to come out of that working group, and we need to be monitoring it. And hopefully, there's going to be public consultation as well, because I think it can work, but there need to be special concessions. Thank you so much, Jodianne. Thank you, David. My pleasure having you once again.
You're welcome.
Welcome. Bye bye.
We'll take our final break and come back with your comments. This section of Taking Stock, The Analysts, was brought to you by Sagicor Investments. 12 months. That's all it takes to transform your finances with Money Mission Premium. For the next year, I'll guide you on the process to take your finances to the next level. You'll get my premium courses, monthly mentorship, and a great community of peers to help you on your journey. Go to moneymissionja.com. Let's get this money.
Let's get this money.
Welcome back. Let's take final comments. Marl says, nonsense that $2,000 will be eaten by inflation daily. So where is the real benefit? The diplomat of the era says, SVL stock price isn't pricing at all, but I've been buying. Drave says, the revamp that NHT needs is that the houses it sells need to be the same amount as the loan. The deposit that you need to put down in order to secure the loan needs to cut out as well. No deposit. Well, I think NHT does do 100% financing, It might be for certain people. So 100% financing means you don't need a deposit. And then the PNP has put forward this proposal for a deposit fund for young owners that they will help you out, a $500,000 grant towards your deposit. But on the point that the houses itself need to be the same amount as the loan, I can see that. But if they're doing 100% financing, then that's 100% of the cost of the house. So, Learn, Grow, Invest is reminding you of their upcoming conference in April. I think it's April 18. And remember as well, you guys get a special discount with the code Kalila, KALILAH, to sign up for the Grow Your Wealth conference over at learngrowinvest.com. Is it? Just type them in. You'll find it if you Google learngrowinvestconference.com. And they're also saying Kalila 20 is the code. They're also saying smaller companies might have a harder time to remain compliant. That is with whatever is required by the micro stock exchange. Well, thank you everybody for joining us this evening. It was my pleasure being here yet again. Next week, we wrap up the budget debates. We have Prime Minister Andrew Holness presenting this Thursday. We'll be following and we'll be live tweeting from that. And then we have Finance Minister Favour Williams making her final presentation and closing out the budget debates the following Tuesday. And more than likely, we're going to have another discussion about it next week. But we'll let you know. Stay tuned. Subscribe to our newsletter, getmoneynews.com. And that will tell you what we have coming up for the week and our recap of the previous week as well. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, share with a friend. Let everyone know that Taking Stock is the place to be on a Tuesday night, because what? Investing is the new sexy. So let's make it cool to talk about money. I'm Kalila Reynolds. See you next week.